Pack Podcast. Eddie Lacy, Mike Daniels, Gilbert Brown, Don Barclay, Micah Hyde, your Green Bay Packers, yesterday's legends and today's superstars. From corporate or non-profit events to private parties, add some spice, hire a Packers player from Mayfield Sports Marketing. For details, just go to PackersTalk.com and click on Player Appearances.
Are you looking for some signed Packer memorabilia?
Look no further than Waukesha Sports Cards.
If the Green Bay Packer can sign it, Waukesha Sports Cards has it.
Check our website for upcoming Packer player and legend signings.
Go to WaukeshaSportsCards.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another victory version of Pulse of the Pack. The Green Bay Packers are 6-0. Fast start completed. Their schedule for October is done. The next time they play a football game, it will be November 1st. That's exciting because we're getting ever closer to the Packers' goal of making the playoffs and exercising all of their demons in those playoffs. That is another storyline for another day. I am Jacob Westendorf here at 11:30 at night, so Insomniacs, welcome to our show. We're happy to have you here. I'm excited to talk about this game because there's really quite a bit to dissect. Joined with me, as always, is Jason Perrone out there in Arizona, so it's a little earlier for him, but nonetheless, Jason's here. Jason, how you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well, and it's good that I guess the next game is November 1st. It gives the Packers the rest of this month to get healthy, which is a great thing, but it also reminds us how close we are to the holidays and the holiday shopping season. So pick your poison, but I pick a Packers-Broncos matchup coming up that I know we're going to talk about very soon. And, Jacob, you've got to be kind of getting podcasted out here as you had an opportunity to jump back onto your old show From the Benches with one Ross Uglum. How did that go?
That was very nice. It was good to see those guys again. They come up for Throwback Weekend every year. I was up in Green Bay this weekend, talked to some of you guys. So those of you that sat and chatted with me, thank you very much. It was good to see some of you. Talk to some of you. I want to thank Kyle Cousineau and Wally Pingle. You guys put on one hell of a party, as always. And for the rest of you that talked, Robert Hammond, Corey Binke for a little while. Some of the other guys, I can't mention all the names on the air because I could be here all day, really. But it was a great time up in Throwback Weekend. Ross, Brian, it was good to be back. Even though that we kind of joke about the competition our shows have, we all are one big happy family, so to speak. So listen to that show every week. Listen to this show as well. It's good to be back. I'm not podcasted out, though. I got plenty of energy, and I think a 6-0 record will do this. And the 6-0 record is where we're going to start. The Packers won against the San Diego Chargers, 27-20. They're 6-0 going into the bye. And we're going to start with the offense. And, again, this isn't the theme to the start of the season. We were joking after the Kansas City Chiefs game that the first segment of our show was always going to be, well, Aaron Rodgers is really awesome. And he is. He still is. He still played pretty well, but by his standards, which are MVP level, didn't really get to that. The offense still had a lot of the same struggles. It was either really efficient, scored a touchdown, or it was kind of a 3-and-out or stall the kind of drive. They had a chance to put the game away early. Melvin Gordon, which, Jason and I clearly predicted on this show that Melvin Gordon would fumble twice and get benched during the game. And those of you that listen, I'm kidding because we said that he would have a signature play. Well, he did have a signature play. He fumbled, and the Packers had a chance at 17-3 to make it 24-3. They lost yardage on that drive and didn't even end up being able to kick a field goal to make it 20-3. So that was frustrating because I really think that could have put the game away. I really think that if they score a touchdown after that drive, it becomes a blowout, and a lot of Phillip Rivers' yardage discussion, which we will get to, becomes a lot of garbage time stuff instead of he really did torch us. But I want to start with the offense because are we to the point now, Jason? 27 points, that's a lot for a lot of teams. For the Packers, it just wasn't a dominant 27 points like you usually expect. They weren't moving the ball up and down the field. They weren't making big plays in the passing game, things of that nature. They didn't run the ball all that well outside of 2 runs from James Starks either. But are we to the point now where maybe this offense at this point is just above average instead of great? That's the question I have early on.
Well, the quick short answer to that is you're probably right. That is yes. Now, I do want to say, since I was so bold and in my typical, as many would like to say, negative fashion, predicted that Melvin Gordon would get his first rushing touchdown of his NFL career against the Packers at Lambeau Field this past weekend. And not only did he completely prove me wrong and did fumble and get benched, he fumbled twice, Jacob. He fumbled twice. So we all remember the second one because that was the one that Clay recovered. Ha had the really nice punch out there, a la Peanut Tillman, and Rook had to sit down and kind of gather himself up. So, I mean, he's a former Badger, so I wish him well, and I can wish him well because I know we aren't going to see the Chargers for another 4 seasons. So they can do whatever the heck they want as long as they're taking out teams that help the Packers. But getting back on track here, yeah, I think there's something to be said at this point now because this is 3 games in a row where the offense has just kind of been okay. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily have watched. I haven't watched enough film to really speak X's and O's here. I do think that one of the things that really hasn't been discussed and talked about that I've kind of wondered to myself over the past couple of weeks is that, you know, I get that the defense and the offense have yet to kind of play a solid game together, but I think that might almost kind of be the design of this Packers team because it seems like when one side of the ball is doing really well, the other side kind of plays counter to it. And I don't mean counter in terms of like if the defense is playing well, the offense tries to play badly. But I think if the defense is playing dominant, the offense's the strategy seems to be to just kind of try to let them lead, and then the offense just kind of tries to drain the clock with longer plays. They might run a little less of their no huddle offense. When the offense is rolling and they're dialing it up and they're clicking, the defense seems to just go into this prevent, super bend, but don't break type of a defense, and they stop blitzing and trying to get after the quarterback and doing some of the more aggressive things. So that might be one theory that could lead to this you know, kind of explanation of why everyone sees the offense as being a little bit more lethargic, although, we say that in relative terms. As you mentioned, 27 points is nothing to scoff at. You know, and I certainly think if the Packers, if they can win scoring 14 points, do it. Doesn't really matter. I mean, this team has already proven now. I mean, there's no question the Packers can win in multiple different ways, and it doesn't have to be by scoring a bevy of points. I mean, we all saw what happened in 2011. You know, if this was the 2011 Packers that went out there, 27 points wasn't going to get it done that season, and they won 15 games. So, you know, we'll see after the bye week. You know, they typically come out strong after the bye. I think, you know, I'll go on and take a look at it. I think Mike McCarthy's only lost one time in his tenure with the Packers coming off the bye week. So, and you know, that's going to become important when we talk about this next opponent that they have. But I think the offense will be fine. It's Aaron Rodgers, and he's still making some plays and making some things happen with some of the weapons that he has. But Jacob, you know, I know you sent the script over. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things. There were a few plays yesterday I think they left on the field, and maybe we want to talk about that. That might be, kind of a topic to continue this conversation.
Yeah, and I think it's one that we can roll with. You know, you're mentioning plays that left on the field. You know, Richard Rodgers is a couple inches away from making a big play down the field. Wasn't able to get his feet in bounds. Rodgers kind of threw it a little too far toward the sideline. A little hard to make a play, but some of that also has to do with Rodgers' limitations, Richard Rodgers' limitations of being down the field. He's not used to being able to make plays like that. It looked like, again, he turned the wrong way and was kind of slow and awkward getting over to make a play on the ball. So his body control is not where you want it to be. And we'll talk more about the tight end situation as it goes. And, you know, you don't talk about leaving plays on the field. I mean, there's a couple plays where they missed some guys, some drops. You know, the Packers ran their play action, roll right, shot play, if you will. Janis was doubled over the top. That's the guy they ran the shot play with. And Randall Cobb was wide open on a deep cross. The ball was a little behind him, but it still hit him in the hands, and he dropped the ball. That reminds me of something else. Even before the injury to Ty Montgomery, Jeff Janis was getting reps during the game, and there were times where James Jones and Randall Cobb were not on the field in two receiver sets, and that's not common. Did it look to you like the Packers were attempting to limit some of their banged-up guys? And I want to start with Jones and Cobb because there is one player in particular that I think will take up a pretty good portion of this conversation, but Jones and Cobb look to be limited in their workload, and it looks like they were trying to get those guys healthy throughout the course of the game. Did you notice anything like that?
Well, at the time, I didn't because, you know, I've started trying to watch more than just the ball and trying to pick up on personnel groups and what I think they're trying to do offensively. You know, Mike McCarthy said last week when there was all this speculation about whether they might just give some guys an extra week of rest going into the bye week. He, started saying, I don't want to talk about the bye week. If you're healthy, you're going to play, all of those kind of things. And then we see Eddie Lacy active. We see Cobb active. We see James Jones active Jones, after he had that touchdown run last week against the Rams, like a couple series later, he's literally like speed walking. He's not even running because his leg is just his hamstring is so tight. So there's probably something to it. I think having those guys out on the field by virtue of their mere presence is going to cause defenses to have to kind of keep an eye on them. Honestly, I think we can say it gets used a lot, and it's an overused expression, but there's probably a lot of teams on this league who would take a Randall Cobb at 60-70% over their starting wide receiver. So, there's still a value to him being out there. But, yeah, I'm pretty sure they probably were trying to be smart with him. That was kind of a horrible drop that Cobb had. And when I write my game balls and lame calls column for Cheesehead TV, I gave strong consideration to giving Cobb a lame call for the drop. But I also had to consider the fact that he's playing hurt out there. He's not 100%. That wasn't why he dropped the ball. That was just a terrible moment of concentration. And at the time that he dropped it, the Packers really kind of needed that play. So that's the gravity of the situation was kind of disappointing. But, yeah, they can only do what they can do, But let me help you transition here, Jacob. I don't know if I'm jumping the script or not, but you mentioned Cobb. You mentioned James Jones. Whether or not he's injured, James Jones is on the field. We all know what's going to happen.
That's right. And all James Jones does
is catch touchdowns.
Correct. 17-17 was the score. Late in the third quarter, Rodgers found James Jones on a back shoulder throw, which was perfectly placed. It was one of those plays that, I'm usually pretty reserved for stuff like that, and I yelled, wow, as soon as that throw was made, just because it was so quick. It just got out of his hands so quickly. It turned out to be the game-winning touchdown. James Jones on one leg, even still, all he does is catch touchdowns, and he's been an absolute godsend to the Packers in the red zone. Something, again, I think we'll discuss a lot in the off-season show is whether or not the Packers should bring him back, even with some of the younger receivers and the return of Jordy Nelson. We were mentioning, guys, that they were limiting workloads, which leads to my next question, and it's kind of been something that we've speculated about off-topic, but now I want to talk about it in the show. And I wrote a story today for today's Pigskin, and my question is, where in the hell is Eddie Lacy? Eddie Lacy is a really good running back when he's at his best. He's a former Offensive Rookie of the Year. McCarthy's talking about how he wants to be conscientious of his punishment. He wants to ride the hot hand, and to me, I like James Starks. He is what he is. He's done very well in his new role since Eddie Lacy got there. He's a change-of-pace running back. Early in the game, he didn't necessarily change the pace because no pace was set yet, but he broke a run early for about 27 yards, and then he had the big touchdown run on the Packers' second touchdown drive. That was all James Starks there. That was great by him. But for the most part, Starks isn't a bell cow. McCarthy could talk about riding the hot hand all he wants, but Eddie Lacy was injured in the Seattle Seahawks game. Carolina's in a couple weeks, so it wasn't that game. But the Seattle Seahawks game, he was injured in the first half, and he came back the following Monday. And to me, it's been pretty clear since then that they were trying to limit his workload. Now, he had 19 carries against the San Francisco 49ers, which is his high since then. But he had 10 against the Chiefs. I believe it was 10 against the Rams, and he only had 3 yesterday. So he had 19 against San Francisco and 23 in the other 3 games since then. It's to the point where Eddie's not on the injury report. He's not injured enough, according to the Packers at least, to be on the injury report. But my theory is, if they're going to leave him out of the game, because he's a player who gets better the more that he's used, and the Packers kind of threw him to the wolves yesterday, and he got absolutely demolished by Denzel Perryman. My goodness, that was a hit. But even so, Lacy was in a situation there where he was set up to fail. And I think something that I've talked about and kind of praised the Packers about is they usually put their players in a position to succeed. They didn't do that with Lacy yesterday, and I'm wondering if he's still injured. I told you I think he is. And I'm also saying now, obviously they don't play this week, so there's a bye week, but if he's going to be injured and limited to that point, I think they might as well just keep him inactive, activate Alonzo Harris, because you're almost wasting active roster spot on game day there. What's the level of concern here with Lacy? I mean, do you think he's injured? Do you think he's in the doghouse for some reason? I know there's been some speculation about his conditioning. Some rumblings have surfaced that he looks a little overweight, but I think those tend to surface every year just because of his body build. He's a bigger guy. I don't think it's an out of shape thing. That's my theory. Do you think he's overweight and out of shape, injured, some combination of the two? Maybe they're connected. What's going on with the Packers running back?
Maybe a combination of all of that. You know, I listen to the Green and Gold post-game show with Bill Michaels and Gary Ellerson. I allude to it every show almost. And, you know, Ellerson's a former running back, and even he said that when you have an ankle injury, one thing that can hamper the recovery is if you're overweight, you know. So, I mean, I don't know if overweight and out of shape necessarily mean the same thing, because I've seen some really big fat guys move very well on Sundays. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's a combination of just his size and his ankle just not having a chance to heal. You know, it might be a little bit of a higher ankle injury, and he's trying to play through it. If he was in danger of hurting it more, I don't think he would be out there. So, you know, this isn't like the wide receivers. We were just talking about the value of having like a Randall Cobb and a James Jones out there at all, you know, just for defenses to have to respect them. It becomes pretty obvious with the running back after one or two plays if they're not right. The defense isn't going to worry so much about them, and they'll start keying on the pass or other things, you know, because it's one less thing to worry about. So the Packers kind of, I think, shoot themselves in the foot a little bit by thinking they're putting a weapon out there when they're not. Now, what Green Bay has to weigh in and measure, I guess for lack of a better term there, is they have to kind of decide whether or not the value of having Lacy out there outweighs what they could potentially get from an Alonzo Harris. You know, because Harris had the one nice carry against the Chiefs, and we haven't seen him since. So, you know, they have to bring him along slowly, and Green Bay's all about how players play in practice, and they're not about to throw somebody out there unless they have pretty good confidence that they get the offense and they're going to make some plays and be okay. I mean, James Starks, the way he ran against the Chargers, and not every defense is the Chargers, but, you know, that gives me a little bit of kind of relief that if they have to hold Lacy back or even possibly let him sit a game or two after the bye week because he just is so off, that they can be okay. They can somehow manage, because between having Rodgers and Starks doing what he does, Starks typically, you know, he'll give you 40, 45 yards a game on average. I mean, he had a lot more yards yesterday, Sunday, because of the long touchdown run that was 65 yards. So that obviously inflated his average. I think his average was like 11.5 yards a carry, which we all know is not really, you know, in real football terms the case. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's probably a little bit of everything. You know, I don't think Eddie Lacy's ever been one to, you know, be a gym rat. I mean, he doesn't watch football. You've heard him say he doesn't watch football on Sundays. He's a gamer. He obviously spends plenty of time on his couch playing video games. You have to remember, too, he's only his third year in the league. So, I mean, he's still in his mid-20s. You know, Jacob, you know what it's like. What do you want to do on days when you get home from work and you don't have podcasts and articles to write? Like, what's the first thing you want to do? You want to play some Madden, right? So I guess, you know, I'm not too worried. It's Eddie Lacy. I think by the time the season wears on, one other thing I saw, too, in an article that was written last year, kind of towards the end of the season, as a good reminder, is that the Packers also like to take advantage of the warmer weather in the early part of the season, and that's when you typically see more of their throwing. And they balance it out a little bit more as they get into the colder part of the season, especially when they're playing at home, and they'll mix more runs in there when it's a little colder and it's harder to, you know, catch a rock-hard football. So not too worried yet, but, you know, this is another thing where, you know, a couple of weeks from now, if we're still talking about it, the bye week is over and there aren't any extended periods of rest, then we might have a little bit of an issue in terms of where the Packers are going to get the production from their run game.
Certainly an issue to keep an eye on as the Packers prepare for a week off and then a contest against the Denver Broncos. And yesterday, Sunday, as you mentioned, was certainly the kind of game where the Packers could have leaned on their running game, because the Chargers were ranked 32nd in the league against the run. And I wonder if the limiting of Eddie Lacy is what I'm going to call it, because I'm not sure what they're doing, but the limiting of Eddie Lacy, I wonder if that affected their game plan. Now, part of it has to do with they only ran 49 plays, and the Chargers ran approximately 137,000 or somewhere in that range. So Packers didn't have the ball a whole lot, but I don't know. That's That's an interesting question, and it's one that I'm tired of thinking about on a yearly basis because it seems like, Eddie's rookie year, we're talking about how he came into OTAs and he looked overweight. The following year, they're talking about his conditioning. Mike McCarthy called him out in a press conference, says he needed to play better, and now they're being, quote, conscientious with his punishment. It just doesn't make sense to me at this point. But, like you mentioned, the warmer weather stuff, that may have some value. Maybe they're trying to throw it all over the lot early in the year and try and win that way, and then they'll add some balance as the year goes on. Yesterday, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, Jeff Janis had a sighting. Ross got a chance to play the Janis horn during the show yesterday, which I found quite funny. Honestly, the jokes and the cult stuff aside, Janis was actually pretty effective. He caught one deep ball on a free play, and then the Aaron Rodgers improvisation, little flip pass to Janis led to the final field goal of the drive. Was it nice to see him? I got to admit, the play, I was sitting in the end zone the Packers were headed toward during the Janis play, and it was very fun to watch him in space. The only one thing I would say as far as a precaution on, and this kind of goes into how I feel about Jeff Janis, the wide receiver, is, as soon as he's running down the field, I see defenders approaching him, and I'm thinking, okay, just hold on to the football. Like, you've made the play, you've got enough yardage, just hold on to the ball. Now, if that were Randall Cobb or James Jones, or even I think at this point Tom Montgomery's kind of earned that trust from me, and I would imagine probably from Rodgers as well. I don't anticipate them making an odd play that would turn the ball over, but that's the only thing with Janis, I suppose, is he hasn't fully earned the trust of Aaron Rodgers. I think that the stuff about, the JS comment type stuff, the Jeff Janis is the next Jordy Nelson type people think that Rodgers is out to get Janis or purposely trying to not involve him in the offensive game plan. I think that was ridiculous because you saw Rodgers. Rodgers was the first one to greet Janis after he made the play. So I think that stuff is a little over the top. But back to the original question, I suppose, was it nice to see him in space and moving? At minimum, even on special teams as a gunner, it's fun to watch Jeff Janis run, isn't it?
Yeah, because we know that he's got the speed. That's never been a question, and everyone talks about the physical comparisons to Nelson. Obviously he's not the same guy, but bigger than seeing him run is actually seeing him run with the football in hand in bounds. That's the biggest thing, Jacob, because, he got out. He ran a 9 route against the Chiefs, and he was out of bounds. He just wasn't in the right spot, and there's been all the talk about he doesn't understand the offense and doesn't know where to be. His awareness just isn't great, all those kind of things. But, yesterday he made a couple of big plays, and that's, one play at a time, and you start to slowly get, garner some respect from Aaron Rodgers. And I think that, the other thing you have to take into consideration is that, Rodgers is pretty savvy. So he's pretty good at getting the most out of his receivers. He spends some pretty good time during the week with these guys, and I think he also takes an approach of, what does it take to motivate this guy? Some guys get more out of him yelling at him on a football field and really getting in their ear because they like that, kind of very, strong-willed personality and leadership style. And other guys just appreciate, being recognized as a person. So Rodgers might sit there and have more of a conversation with them about themselves. And so whatever it is that he's doing with Janis, I think is slowly bringing him along. Hey, Janis is a 7th rounder. So anything you get out of him really is kind of gravy. And, we're talking about a guy that because of injury has become an important part of this offense. Not that he's, going to get 10 balls a day, but he's got to contribute because Nelson's was gone from day one. Cobb is only a fraction of what he is. They had to bring James Jones in, who's been amazing. And so, he certainly is no one to ignore in this offense. But, Janis is they're going to need a couple of those every week. He doesn't have to score touchdowns all the time. If he does, that's great because he's got the speed to burn past guys. And if he can ever, get in on that shot play, that shot route that we've talked about, then, the sky might open up and the heavens may open up on the Packers this season because, that's kind of the big missing link in a lot of people's eyes, although I think the Packers offense is fine without it. But, yeah, Janis, it was nice to see him make that long catch. That was big. But, the shovel pass, that was an improv play. And they had some film on Janis, and there were a couple plays earlier where Rodgers was scrambling and the play broke down, and Janis just wasn't coming back to him like you see receivers doing. And it was kind of that, perfect. That was the epitome of Janis not doing what he's supposed to do again, and as one of the reasons why he wasn't getting on the field and he wasn't getting a lot of balls thrown from Rodgers. So for him to have the awareness and get the shovel pass and then take it for long yardage and kind of show off that speed, those are the kind of things that are going to build his confidence. Rodgers gets behind him. He's finally going to realize, hey, I've got the confidence of this quarterback. I don't want to let him down. I don't want to let this team down, and I can be a big part of something special here. Hopefully all those things are resonating with him, and he's understanding that, that's why he's seeing the field more. It's not just because of injury, because, hey, they didn't play him much, even when they could have possibly used him on offense the past couple of weeks. So I think the Packers have handled Janis well, and I don't want to jump the gun, too soon here, but I think it's starting to pay dividends.
Yeah, that could be the case. And you mentioned, 7th-round pick. Anything you get from him is gravy. I think that's a great way to put it. And one thing I read today is for some of these people, it's almost like Jeff Janis has to be the focal point of the offense for him to be an effective player. That's not the case. He mentioned today or Ron Zook mentioned today that Janis walked up to him yesterday during the game and said, they're calling out my number, which means they're aware of him. Janis has become a special teams ace for this team. And his athleticism and stuff plays well into that type of player. And if that's the production you're going to get, realistically, people say it all the time, your late-round picks, 5th, 6th, 7th rounders, those are special teams players you're trying to get there. And Janis is a hell of a special teams player at this point in his career. And if that's the production he's going to get, he definitely is going to have a spot on this roster, especially with the new emphasis on special teams after last year's debacle. And after the Michigan Wolverine debacle with special teams, I don't know if I want to talk about special teams ever again. So let's please move on from that. One bit of injury news. Ty Montgomery was injured during the game. All tests came back negative, which is huge news considering the injury looked horrendous. From the stands, it looked like he wasn't putting any weight on his left leg. Some people speculated it was a knee injury. Other bit of news from the wide receivers. Jared Abbrederis had a nice kick return in Montgomery's absence, which is really worth mentioning just because it's his first meaningful action since he joined the team, which is it's nice to see. He's a local kid. You could hear the crowd kind of get excited that they saw him on the field, and he really set the Packers up with good field position with the first possession in the third quarter, which was nice to see. The Packers, I think, have a decent option with him as a kickoff returner if Montgomery is unable to go with this ankle injury. The next thing I want to talk about before we move on, in former Packers news, first of all, Jermichael Finley officially retired. Not that it was ever expected that he would play in the NFL again, but I feel like it's worth mentioning because we are discussing a tight end situation here. Currently, the Packers' tight ends are Richard Rodgers, who's a solid player, Kennard Backman, a raw rookie, and Justin Perillo, who to me is the epitome of I saw a photo of him the other day, and he looks like a guy that I typically see at a local bar up here, either in Wisconsin or in Rockford, where I'm from, and it's just kind of funny to look at. I'm like, that's a professional football player. Like, this guy looks like he just spends his time at biker bars. But jokes aside, it's not really a rumor. It was just a report by Forbes that the Packers should be interested in a guy like Vernon Davis. Now, Vernon Davis obviously has very famously in the past said that he was praying Green Bay didn't draft him. Is this really worth discussing? Because are the Packers really going to go out and acquire Vernon Davis? Probably not, but it's the bye week, and what the hell else are we going to talk about? So the question I have for you, Jason, is a tight end like him, the Packers, Jermichael Finley left mid-season 2013. So in about 2.5 seasons, or probably about 2 full seasons, half that year, half this year, and then 1 full season, the Packers haven't adequately replaced Jermichael Finley as a tight end that can stretch the field and kind of make some plays down the field. Now, I know a lot of you listening to this show probably don't like Jermichael Finley and listen. Some of the criticism of him was warranted. He did have some issues with drops, things of that nature, but reality is he's the best tight end the Packers have had in quite some time. He was better, in my opinion, than Bubba Franks. So with that being taken out of the equation, you're talking about guys like Mark Tremere and Keith Jackson. I mean, that's pretty good. I think that people just had 2009 playoff game against Cardinals, which, Jason, you know that firsthand, where that's the Jermichael Finley to envision. And since he wasn't that, he was disappointing. I don't think that was the case, but that's me, and this isn't a Jermichael Finley debate. What I want to know is Vernon Davis, well, one, is this even worth discussing? Do you think there would be any interest? And the second one is a tight end like him, what could he add to this offense?
Only because it's the bye week do I think that there's even a remote possibility that the Packers would make a move like that. Mid-season, no. I mean, they'd bring somebody in training camp or at the end of, in the summer, so they have time to integrate into the offense. I mean, they're not in a in a desperate situation at tight end. Someone joked yesterday that, the speculation was, would the Packers get after a player like Vernon Davis? And Ted Thompson's response was he elevated Justin Perillo from the practice squad. So Perillo actually made a nice catch yesterday, and I kind of joked on Twitter, Justin Vernon Davis Perillo was my tweet. I had Vernon Davis in quotes. So
yeah, and he kind of lost on a pass in the end zone there was a ball that Rodgers threw his way in the end zone, and it looked like Perillo had no idea what the hell he was doing either. So it evened out.
Well, it did. It definitely did. And there's a reason why he was on the practice squad and not on the active roster, even though he was on the roster for a time last season as well. I mean, the Packers like him. And, maybe Ted Thompson liked Vernon Davis coming out of college too and just decided to go with A.J. Hawk instead, because I think A.J. Hawk was the 5th pick in 2006. We all remember that. And then I think Vernon Davis went immediately after the 6th pick to the Niners. So, that was obviously Ted's choice at the time, and in hindsight, would he have done it again? I don't know. I mean, A.J. Hawk gave the Packers some decent years at the beginning of his tenure. So, but, obviously, with who Vernon Davis is today, and given what the Packers have at tight end right now, Corliss is on the injured reserve designated to return, so he won't be back until after Thanksgiving. Backman's a rookie. Perillo's, like you said, he's, here today and gone tomorrow and back again the next day. As far as his awareness and his readiness to be in the offense. So, I mean, immediately, right away, with a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, I think Vernon Davis would be a huge upgrade at the tight end position. But then there's the question of, does he understand this offense? Has he played in this type of an offense? Is he the type that's going to have that chemistry with an Aaron Rodgers? I mean, I think with the kind of season that the 49ers are playing and having this season, I should say, and with the fact that they're shopping Davis and it's gotten out there, I'm sure he's aware of it. He had his opinions about Green Bay 10 years ago, but I'll bet you he probably wouldn't mind coming in and playing for one of the best teams in the league and the best quarterback in the league now compared to what he's got in San Francisco with, that other quarterback, that number 7. So, I think it sounds like a great idea, and it's fun to think about and dream about. But I think that's probably about as far as it's going to go, because then, Green Bay's got it. And we haven't even talked about what they'd have to give up in order to get a Vernon Davis. I'm pretty sure the 49ers are going to want to stockpile draft picks because they know they have to start over. So getting rid of Vernon Davis right now would be the smartest thing they could do. He's at the end of his career, but there's probably some teams that would find some value in bringing him in and what he could do for their team right away. So you're looking at probably a 3rd, 4th, or 5th round pick. You and I talked about this over the weekend. A 3rd, no. A 4th, probably not. A 5th, now you could maybe sway me, maybe, but I still think you have to kind of look at the last few drafts and where the Packers have gotten their talent. And I think somebody like Ted Thompson is going to look at his track record in certain rounds and say, hey, is 2 years of this guy worth what I could potentially draft next year and get 7 or 8 seasons from on the upside? So, I don't know if it's going to go much further than that, but, he would be to wrap it up, Davis would be an immediate upgrade, and I think over the course of the season, if he stayed healthy, yes, he could be kind of a missing piece, but, he's not going to be a Jermichael Finley and what Finley was. And, again, I don't know that it's going to go much further than this conversation. I think if we don't see anything in the next couple of days, and I certainly don't expect to, then it's probably not going to happen, because trade deadline is November 3rd. It's coming up quickly, and then after that, it's all a moot point because they can't make trades anymore.
Right, and realistically, if they're going to bring him in, this would be the week to do it because they have the bye, they could get him up to speed on the offense, yada, yada, yada. But I'm with you. I don't think the conversation goes any further than what you and I are having. Honestly, I think Ted Thompson probably won't even talk about it. But, you mentioned how the Packers like Justin Perillo, and it just kind of made me wonder, what the hell kind of tight ends do they like and why? Because, I like Richard Rodgers for what he is, and they seem to like Andrew Corliss, who's another, average player, and Justin Perillo is below average. It's just kind of funny to see some of the players that they fall in love with, and, I just don't see anything special about any of those guys. Granted, I watch teams that have guys like, Seattle wastes him, but they have Jimmy Graham, Rob Gronkowski, and I get there's not that many of those guys, but the Packers, like I said, they haven't adequately replaced Jermichael Finley in 2 years, and it's kind of frustrating. But that's enough on the offensive side of the ball because there's enough to talk about on the other side, and that was the defense. And we had talked about last week how much improved the defense was, and everything was great. And then Sunday happened, and Phillip Rivers threw for 837 yards. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but not by much. 503 was the yardage by Phillip Rivers, and you mentioned it earlier. That was 2011-esque. Yards on yards on yards. Not a lot of points, which I guess is the positive out of this. Is this a blip or a trend for the defense? One thing I did notice is, Burnett and Rodgers didn't play, and you can see the impact for that. One thing about, the kind of running joke I guess you have among Packers Twitter is Mike McCarthy talking about communication issues in the secondary. Well, Burnett wasn't there, and that was really the first time it felt like he was missed from a communication standpoint and from a covering the tight end stuff, short crossers, stuff like that kind of standpoint. It looked like Phillip Rivers, I tell you what, I was having conversations with Packers fans, and I told them the same thing I told you guys last week. I thought the Packers were going to win big because I thought every matchup the Packers had in their favor was far outweighing what the Chargers had in their favor. Well, talking to people, they were like, well, we're going to win because Phillip Rivers isn't very good. That's not the case. I mean, I don't want to exaggerate and be a prisoner of the moment because he did just torch the Packers, but Phillip Rivers is a top echelon quarterback in today's NFL, in my opinion, and I thought he was a master at the line of scrimmage on Sunday. You could see him run his no-huddle offense. He got the Chargers in great looks, and the Packers never really adjusted to that, and I think some of that has to do with Morgan Burnett. So the question I guess I have is this a blip or trend, or, the Packers are going to have to beat quarterbacks like Phillip Rivers to get to and ultimately win a Super Bowl? I mean, at this point, if the season ended today, everyone would probably agree that it's Packers-Patriots for the Super Bowl, and that Tom Brady guy over there is pretty damn good. The Packers are going to have to beat a guy like that to win not only in the playoffs but in the Super Bowl as well. Can they beat a quarterback like this? Did they give some sort of blueprint? And to kind of tease something you talked about me earlier, the definition of insanity is what?
Well, the definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, and that's what I felt like the Packers defense was doing all day yesterday. And if you follow me on Twitter and you read my tweets during the game, first of all, I partially apologize because I know that my realistic take on the game is a little bit much to handle because, I tend to like to highlight what's not going well versus what is going well. But then again, if you go back and look at the numbers again, it does even out. My passing game and my running game is more balanced than would be thought on Twitter. But I mean, I was just flabbergasted and baffled. I mean, and I think that was really more related to Chargers wide receiver Keenan Allen, who we're probably going to talk about. So we'll save that for that portion of the conversation. But yeah, I mean, we were just talking before the podcast started, and I was at the last time these two teams played in San Diego. And I felt like I was in the stands, and I thought Phillip Rivers had 500 yards passing in that game against the 2011 defense. And I went back and looked, and he had 385. Now, 385 is still a lot of passing yards in one game against that particular defense. But, I mean, he literally had 503 yards passing, and the stats basically take away the yardage that you lose on sacks, and so then those become your net passing yards. So Rivers had a net of 488 on the day, average of 7.7 yards a pass, which doesn't sound that impressive, but when you consider that he threw it 65 times and completed 43, that's a lot. He had no interceptions. So to throw the ball that many times and not get picked off, which actually was probably more to do with the Packers defensive backs that can't catch, then, but still, Rivers was great yesterday. He played a great game. He's a great quarterback. He is elite. The Packers defense, I don't know what to tell you, man. This was really disappointing to see them not make the adjustments, and because you can't tell me that it wasn't a lack of adjustments. You can't tell me that all of a sudden these players who have been making plays and been closing out games and have been a strong point for this team all of a sudden just forgot how to play defense. I don't think they were put in the best position to defend what it was that San Diego was doing. So San Diego came out and Rivers came out throwing the quick passes. He was dropping back, getting the ball out fast. Packers fans got a glimpse of what life is like for fans of the opposing teams of the Packers yesterday, because that's the kind of thing that Aaron Rodgers does. He gets rid of the ball fast. He takes care of the football. There's not often much that defenses can do that baffle Rodgers, and so it's kind of like, well, they can't get to Rivers for some reason. This offensive line had 3 starters out, but you might as well have thought that they had 5 Pro Bowlers that were blocking because the Packers couldn't get a pass rush on him. He's not a mobile guy, so I mean, they just had a good offensive game plan. And then Keenan Allen, I mean, give me a break. it's one thing if a guy's going to have a good day and he's going to catch 5 or 6 balls, 7, 8. When you start getting into double digits, it just becomes ridiculous. And he was catching everything. It didn't matter. It was on the sideline in the middle of the field. He had the first 5 or 6 catches of the game. So it became obvious early that Rivers was going to key on Allen. And the Packers just did not have an answer for it, and they just kept running the same defense. And so the score dictates what they do. We talked earlier about when the offense is playing well, what the defense does. They sat in that same zone. They weren't really blitzing much earlier in the game. I think that was a second half adjustment when they started to dial up the pressure, and then finally they got to Rivers a couple times. But it was mind-numbing to me to see that, and I kept referring back to the 2012 game against the Colts when Reggie Wayne just went off, and it's like, do I need to come down to the sideline and let everybody know what number jersey they need to be keying on here? Because I can tell you, I've got a great view of it from my living room, 1,800 miles away. I don't understand why the Packers can't see it on the field. And again, Jacob, I'm not the X's and O's guy, so I don't know if you have any insight. I mean, you were at the game, so maybe not the benefit of having like the telecast or looking at the All-22 film yet. But I just, I don't want to get down too much on Dom Capers because, again, I think he did kind of make some adjustments that helped them close out the game at the end. But 500 yards is just completely unacceptable. And that was just, call it what you want, slice it and dice it any way you want. When you give up that kind of yardage and the trend was that it was the same guy over and over and over again, yeah, Rivers can be a great quarterback. That's fantastic. But this defense still should have done a lot better. And I think that starts at the top with Capers and the position he put these guys in to make plays. Fortunately, they did at the end, but I just, the last part of your question to answer, I'm not going to worry and panic that trend. I don't think it's happened enough times to where, it's going to be a huge concern. Now, if Peyton Manning comes out, now Peyton Manning is still a very good quarterback, and he's got, weapons around him, Demaryius Thomas, and, that passing game that he's got there in Denver. But if Peyton Manning comes out and has some sort of a career game against the Packers, that's the second really good quarterback in a row that they have trouble with. Then we can start having concern and start reviving the debate about whether or not the Packers can only beat teams with a mediocre quarterback. But, fortunately last year they did beat the Patriots and Tom Brady. I know they're a different team this year than they were last year, but they're only 1 year removed from having beaten the New England guy that they might end up facing in some sort of a big game later this year that we won't say by name so we don't jinx anything. I think they'll be okay. It's a bye week. We're going to come out of the bye, and a lot of what I think that the opinion and the tone of what I expect from this team is going to come from these games forward.
Yeah, and one thing that we talked about, you mentioned a little, was the lack of pass rush. I think some of that had to do with the plan that Mike McCoy and Frank Reich had was, 3-step drops, quick passing game, stuff like that. But even still, the Chargers were missing 3 offensive linemen, and the pass rush didn't do a whole lot. It was clear that their plan with Matthews was inside pressure, stunts, and I'll give the Chargers credit. I mean, they held up very well against that. Later in the game, the Packers were able to make some plays, get Rivers on the ground, rattle him a little bit. The last play of the game, Julius Peppers just ate the right tackle for lunch and gotten Rivers' face, which we'll talk about here in a minute. I'm going to go with it's more of a blip as well, and we're going to find out if it's a blip or trend very quickly because Peyton Manning on name recognition alone deserves your respect for that stuff. Cam Newton will be the following week, and I know that a lot of people aren't really talking about him. Cam Newton has really come into his own the last couple of years. I think that's going to be another stiff test for this defense, and after that they'll face guys like Matt Stafford, Teddy Bridgewater, all the way down the line. The next really, really good quarterback they'll face off the top of my head on the schedule is probably Tony Romo, assuming he's back from a broken collarbone when they take on the Dallas Cowboys, and that's later in the season. But the Packers are going to see more good quarterbacks. The mediocre quarterback stuff, that's pretty much over. They're not going to be facing the Alex Smiths, the Colin Kaepernicks, the Nick Foleses of the world. Now you're talking about guys who are capable of really lighting it up. I know Matt Stafford hasn't had a good year this year, but he still is capable of throwing for a lot of yards, touchdowns. Jay Cutler, I know that Packers fans are going to laugh, and I know he's playing in his house of horrors at Lambeau Field, but he's played better with Adam Gase as his offensive coordinator. Teddy Bridgewater has looked pretty good in some limited time as well. The Packers are going to face some tougher guys, and at the end of the year, I think you'll see whether or not the Packers can hold up when they play Romo and Carson Palmer in the last 2 to 3 weeks of the season. That's the test I'm looking forward to again. So they'll be facing a guy like Rivers, but I think this will ultimately end up a blip rather than a trend. Hopefully they'll have some guys back by then. Injury news, Nick Perry, Morgan Burnett, and B.J. Raji did not play yesterday. It's possible Nick Perry's back after the bye. my guess, and this is a very uneducated guess, but my guess is it'll probably be another week or so for him. And then Burnett and Raji, I'm going to guess they'll be back. Raji, we really don't know about the severity of his injury, but Burnett sounds like he's been getting close. And Mike McCarthy will deny this to his dying day because he did say in front of a press conference that if they're healthy, they're going to play. Well, my guess is Morgan Burnett was held out to give him the extra 2 weeks of rest. But the end of the game, the Chargers had the ball. It was 27-20. They had a first and goal at about the 4-yard line, and the Packers came up with 4 consecutive stops, 2 runs, 2 passes, 1 incomplete pass to Gates, 2 runs up the middle. Dayton Jones made a big stop on 3rd down, and my goodness, he's been fantastic. He had, depending on who you look at, multiple tackles for loss is what I'm going to go with for an official number, but the Packers had him with 4. ESPN had him with 2. He had a sack, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute. And then, obviously, the last play of the game was a pass to Danny Woodhead, and rookie Demarius Randall passes yet another test. And, Jason, you wanted to talk about earlier how you felt the offense up the plays on the field. I felt the defense did the same thing. Sam Shields, he had one play that was pretty tough, but he had the ball hit him in the hands. Could have been an interception. He had another one hit him right in the 3 and the 7, and this is a guy who played receiver in college. Maybe this is why they transitioned him to defensive back, because he couldn't catch the ball. I'm not sure. I'm joking for the most part on that. But, they left some plays on the field. Demarius Randall got his hands on one ball deep in the end zone that Malcolm Floyd almost mossed him on, but Randall could have had a pick on that. And realistically, if he keeps his footing, Randall might have a pick 6 on that last play of the game. But Rivers had Julius Peppers in his face. The ball goes to the right side of the end zone. Randall dives, knocks it away. That was the final play that was meaningful, which leads us to the final segment of this show. It'll be the Mark Mayfield play of the game. Thank you to Mayfield Sports and Waukesha for all that you do for our network. But the Mayfield play of the game we do every week. I'm not going to go with the obvious one, and part of me wants to kind of let you have it because I'm pretty sure where you're going and where I should go as well. But that's an Arizona State guy, so I'll let you have it. But I'm going to go with the Dayton Jones sack. Because it was in a big spot in the game. The Packers hadn't gotten a whole lot of pass rush. It was third and kind of manageable, and if it was an incomplete pass, the Chargers had already kind of shown throughout the game, it looked like to me that the Chargers' plan was, we are the inferior team, and we know it, and we're going to pull out all the stops. Most coaches, late in the first half, Chargers have 4th and inches from the 1, and instead of kicking the field goal for the sure points to make it 17-6, they went for the touchdown. That gamble paid off. They went for it on a 4th down earlier than that. And I also wondered aloud that because of that game plan, if the Chargers had scored on one of those plays, were they going to go for 2 and the win? And I would not have been surprised one bit had they done it. But it looked like the Chargers treated the Packers like they were the fully superior team. And if I were a Chargers fan, I would have a little bit of a problem with that because I still think the Chargers are a pretty good team. They've just had some bad luck. Early in the year, they've been beaten on the goal line the last 2 weeks. They're one stop on a run play from Le'Veon Bell or a touchdown pass and a win in overtime away from being 4-2 instead of 2-4. But this is the NFL, and it really only is wins and losses. But the Dayton Jones sack came in a key point in the game, forced the Chargers to punt, gave the Packers a chance to try and run the clock out, get a drive going at the end of the game. They did. They kicked a field goal to go up 27-20, which proved to be big because if they don't get that field goal on that drive, then we're talking about that. That goal line stand is the difference between winning and losing the game, assuming the Chargers go conventional and kick the extra point, of course. But Dayton Jones, he's done nothing but make plays all year. He's coming into his own as a first-round pick. He's a guy that I banged the table for that year in that draft, so it's nice to see him coming through. It can legitimately be argued at this point that Dayton Jones has been their best pass-rushing defensive lineman. And he's a guy that I mentioned it earlier, how they've been putting players in positions to succeed, and typically the Packers do a good job of that. Jones is never going to be a really strong run defender, I don't think, but he's always going to be a good pass rusher, and the Packers really do limit his snaps to pass-rushing situations, and he's done very well with those. Now, oddly enough, one of his biggest plays of the game was a tackle in the backfield of Brandon Oliver. It might have been Oliver or Woodhead. I'm not sure off the top of my head now, but tackle in the backfield on a run play. But the sack, that's my Mayfield Sports play of the game. Jason, go ahead and gush about Arizona State because this has to be where you're going.
Well, before I do, I just want to say it was Danny Woodhead that Dayton Jones tackled, and I know that it was Danny Woodhead because when he tackled him, I was emphatically and ecstatically screaming and yelling because I was so tired of the little man running all over the field like the little white guy that he is. I know that's not the PC way to describe him, but it was so good to see the Packers finally stuff him, and I thought, man, you know what? I can be comfortable with that. I'm cool with that. Now they got to do it one more time, try to close this game out. And obviously, you know where the ball's going. The ball's going to Antonio Gates. He's there. Keenan Allen's out of the game at this point with the hip injury. And so obviously the Chargers are going to Antonio Gates. Makes perfect sense. And Demarius Randall even said to reporters after the game that he was keying on Gates, and that was where they all thought he was going to go. The Packers, for lack of having an answer for Keenan Allen or to the Chargers passing game all day, you know, if Dom Capers was going to come through and finally get his act together, you know, he picked the perfect time to do it because he must have called the perfect defense because Gates was bottled up. Rivers looked at him briefly and had no option there and went to his second option or his second choice, which was the guy that I thought we had seen the last of after getting crushed the play prior by your pick, Dayton Jones, for your Mayfield play of the game. And he threw the out route in Danny Woodhead's direction, and Demarius Randall just made an outstanding play, broke on the ball, dove, knocked it down, knocked it out of bounds, and game's over. Made a great effort, didn't touch the receiver, didn't get the flag. Sure, he could have picked it off, but at that point, you know, there's no need for style points. Just get out of there and get the win and go enjoy your bye week. And, you know, those guys were gassed at that point. I mean, for them to make that kind of play and be able to do what they did, I mean, they all had to be just absolutely out of breath. I mean, I mentioned on Twitter the rate that the defense was playing and the Chargers offense was moving, that the Packers defense was going to be just completely out of fuel by midway through the second quarter because the Chargers were just driving, and it was taking a long time to score. So the big ASU first-rounder, Demarius Randall, comes up with a huge play. The big thing I liked about it, too, and it earned him a game ball because he actually had a tough game going up to that point. He did defend another pass. You know, he had a jump ball. You know, you mentioned Sam Shields, who had a tough opportunity for an interception. Randall had a jump ball that he might have possibly been able to haul in if you know, the receiver, and I'm not sure if that was Keenan Allen or who it was. I think Keenan Allen only had one target his way that he did not catch all day, and that might have been it. But he wasn't able to pull it in, and he had some trouble in coverage. And we have to remember he's a rookie, and so he's still, you know, kind of learning the ins and outs of the game. So some of the savvier quarterbacks and receivers are going to pick on him a little bit. But what I like about Randall is that he seems to show in every game what you want to see out of a cornerback, and that's that short memory. So he has a rough time, has a couple bad plays, and then all of a sudden he shows up and makes a big play. That's what you want to see. You don't want to see these guys get deflated and get dejected, take themselves mentally out of a game, and then, you know, that's the difference between maybe that pass getting completed to Woodhead and the Chargers tying it up and sending it into overtime, which is not ever what you want because then too many things are left up to chance and out of the control of your own team, or doing what Randall did, which was make the play, close out the game, seal the victory. So that was an easy choice for my Mayfield play of the game was Demarius Randall. And, you know, really happy for him. And, you know, I have to keep reminding myself and I have to keep admitting to our listeners out there, you know, when he was chosen in the first round by Ted Thompson, I didn't understand the pick. And I don't even know if I liked it. You know, I don't care if he was a Sun Devil. And maybe I felt a little snake bitten after being so excited about Carl Bradford last year and then seeing him kind of become what he's become and not necessarily pan out. But Demarius Randall has been fantastic. He's earned every bit of playing time that he's gotten. Whenever they move Casey Hayward inside to the slot, Randall moves outside. And I think before long, I think you're just going to start seeing Demarius Randall as your starting outside corner. And I think they're going to rotate Hayward in as needed. And that's just, you know, Hayward's just going to have to understand his role on this team. And, you know, when Morgan Burnett comes back, and Jacob, I think you're right. I think they were holding him back just to make calf muscles kind of things a little tricky, and so I think they're giving him the extra week of rest to make absolute sure when he comes back that he can be a weekly contributor. So then they got to figure out also what to do with Micah Hyde. But good problem to have. You got all these different guys that they can rotate in and out. Randall was fantastic, and it earned him a game ball for the play that he made. And I think it was the play, obviously the moment of it, the huge implications of it, the significance of it, but also the resolve that he showed. You love to see that out of a rookie. Hopefully more to come from him and some of these other young defensive backs. You know, Quentin Rollins had kind of a rough day too. He missed a couple tackles. You hope they take the bye week and get all the better for it because we're going to need these guys, these younger guys, in the stretch run coming in off the bye.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, good problem to have. So as I stated on my Facebook post after the game, way to make a play, rookie Demarius Randall. That's going to do it for today's show. Be sure to check out PackersTalk.com for all your latest Packers news and podcasts. You can follow the show on Twitter. We are at Pulse of the Pack. You can follow me. I am at Jacob Westendorf. You can follow Jason at Jason Perrone. Next week is the bye week, which it's nice for the team. It sucks for us because let's be real. I mean, we want to watch. I love watching football, but I'm football Sundays are much better when the Packers play, for me at least. I can't speak for the rest of you. Maybe it makes it less stressful. I don't know. But we will be doing, it's not quite mid-season, but we will be doing a mid-season preview show, kind of what we did for the NFL preview show earlier in the year, discussing ins and outs of the league. It'll be mainly Packers-centric like it always is here at Pulse of the Pack, but we will talk about around the league stuff, some issues going on, check in on our postseason predictions, which I will let you know right off the bat. Mine suck. I have the Packers in the Super Bowl, which actually looks okay, but my AFC representative is the Baltimore Ravens, and they are bad at football. So, like I told you guys, I'm sure in the preseason show there's always one of my Super Bowl teams that turns out to be not very good. Thankfully, it wasn't the Packers so far, knock on wood, but it was the Baltimore Ravens. So we're going to talk about that stuff. We'll talk about that we want to see from the Packers in the second half. It'll be a fun show. We'll get you a date and time exact when we can do it. With it being so far out with both of our busy schedules, we're going to try and figure out a time to do it to give you guys the best possible product, and hopefully it's not at, well, what now amounts to 12:30 here in the Central Time Zone. So if any of you are out there listening on the East Coast, thank you, because it's 1:30 out there, and you guys are crazy. But we love it. Thank you, Insomniacs. If you listen live tonight, go ahead and download us, subscribe to us on iTunes, PackersTalk.com. We appreciate that. Give us a positive rating. Listen to our show. Download that. Tell your friends. And let us know by using either at Pulse of the Pack or tweeting at me and Jason some stuff you guys want to hear from the show. It's mid-season. We'll use the bye week to self-scout and get our show better, just like Mike McCarthy will for the Packers team as a whole. But that's going to do it for now. Enjoy the bye week. The Green Bay Packers, I know we talked about it. We'd rather win ugly than lose pretty any day of the week. Thankfully, this is not college football, and style points do not matter. 6-0 is 6-0. When we return for our regular shows, it's Aaron Rodgers, it's Peyton Manning, it's Sunday Night Football, Packers against the Broncos. I'm very excited to preview that show with you guys. But before I go too long, thank you, as always, for listening to Pulse of the Pack.
Pulse of the Pack podcast. Eddie Lacy, Mike Daniels, Gilbert Brown, Don Barclay, Micah Hyde, your Green Bay Packers, yesterday's legends and today's superstars. From corporate or nonprofit events to private parties, add some spice, hire a Packers player from Mayfield Sports Marketing. For details, just go to PackersTalk.com and click on Player Appearances.
Are you looking for some signed Packer memorabilia?
Look no further than Waukesha Sports Card.
If the Green Bay Packer can sign it, Waukesha Sports Cards has it.
Check our website for upcoming Packer player and legend signings.
Go to WaukeshaSportsCards.com.